Hey guys, it's Pipu here with another Hellgate video. In my last video, I showed you guys a budget Hellgate build with a regular bow and a healer. Today we're gonna do the one-hand curse version of the same build. Now, the regular bow, I called it a budget build because it's really just good in the low levels. When you want to be more competitive, I don't think the regular bow is really a good weapon for 2v2 Hellgates because it gets countered so easily. If you get matched up against a another team that's running a little bit of a tryhard build, if they have swaps for mage robes and fincals, you just get purge spammed and you'll never really do damage with a regular bow. Now, the one-handed curse is a weapon that can also pump out a lot of damage with no specs and no IP. But the good thing about it is it's not as easy to counter as the regular bow. Now, when you're running the budget version of this build with a Hunter Hood, the one-hand curse actually does get countered very heavily by Life Touch, because the Life Touch E can cleanse your Death Curse E. But in the tryhard version of this build, you'd be dropping the Hunter Hood for a Cultist Cowl. And the Cultist Cowl makes it harder for the Life Touch to just cleanse your E every time, because then, like, if you stagger your Cultist Cowl and your E, the Life Touch on the other team will have to choose between cleansing your Cultist Cowl or cleansing your E, and they're both really high pressure skills. So that makes it a little harder for them to deal with. Now, if you don't want to use a Cultist Cowl, another way you can try to overcome the Life Touch counter is by using a Demonic Staff instead of the one-hand curse. The one-hand curse, yeah, it does a lot of damage, but if you get matched up against a Life Touch without using Cultist Cowl, you'll just never be able to get your E off, right? So if you switch to the Demonic Staff instead, you'll still be pressuring their healer with your Qs and W, but you will have a E now, and the E is a big healing denial. So that's something that you could think about switching to if you get into that matchup. So let's start talking about builds. We're gonna put both the beginning budget build as well as the final tryhard version of the build on the screen. So the budget version of the build is very similar to the regular bow build that I showed last week. You run a one-hand curse, a clear cow, mage robe, knight boots, and a torch offhand. And you want to start off with regular run on your boots. And after checking out the other team and seeing that they're not running some kind of a one-shot comp, you switch off from regular run to the shield skill on your boots, and you switch off from clerical to Hunter Hood on your helmet. Now, when you buy your items for this build, make sure you buy a T5 Curse Staff, not a T4 one like I have the image for. Because the T4 Curse Staff does not give you access to the skilled Grudge, it's a W skill that gives you damage on auto attacks. Or more precisely, makes your auto attacks apply a dot. This W is very important to have when you're fighting against other healer teams. This W is also the reason why we want to run a torch offhand, because the attack speed from the torch lets you apply the dots faster, so it can pump out more pressure while the buff is on you. The torch is also just a very cheap offhand to begin with, so it's very budget friendly for the starter build. If you're playing against a double DPS team, it's probably better to run the snare W instead of Grudge, because having that little extra CC helps you chase people down when they start running away, which is something that happens inevitably if your healer is really good. If you want to be really tryhard about it, you could also bring a different offhand to swap to when you're facing double DPS comms. And for that, I think a Moisak is really good. You could also use a shield or a Crib Kendo, but I like the middle ground, which is the Moisak. As you start upgrading this build, you'll want to get a Thetford cape for your cape slot. That is the best cape for this build. And if you are playing the cheap version of the build and you have trouble playing against holies, or not holies but life touch healers, then picking up a demonic staff or a great curse staff can help you a little bit. In the final tryhard version of this build, you'll want to have basically every piece of equipment that you see on the screen. Maybe you don't need the demonic or the great curse staff. Those are mostly just to help you deal with life touch healers while you don't have a cultist cow. But you will need every other piece of equipment on the screen. So if you want to play the ultimate tryhard version of this build, then you'll want to start off with a double-bladed staff and soldier boots. And for your helmet, you want to go clerical, and mage robe is fine for that. And the idea of this is you start off with this very high mobility set, so you can go check out the other team and see what they're running. And then when you see what they're running, you disengage from them, you just run away, and you switch your build to whatever items you have that counters their build. If you check out the other team and you find out that they're playing some kind of a life touch comp, you will need the cultist cow at least. There's two things in this build that helps you play against the life touch. Now, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but if you're playing a one-hand curse into a life touch, they can just cleanse your E off with the life touch E, so it's very difficult to actually get your bomb in. There's two things in this build that helps you get that death curse actually hit. One of them is the cultist cow. When you drop the cultist cow on the other team, it puts a lot of pressure on them, right? Because basically, like every time the person uses a skill or auto attack, while they have the cultist cow active on them, it does damage to them. So this can pressure their healer a lot. And the healer will have to choose them between using their life touch to cleanse your cultist cow or saving it for your E. And if they use it to cleanse your cultist cow and you drop your E, you will do a lot of damage with your E, so that's just as good as if they didn't cleanse the cultist cow. Another thing you can do is watch the behavior pattern in the healer, like kind of find out when they usually use the life touch E. Whether if they wait until the last second right before your bomb goes off, or if they use it right away, and use your Avalonian robe to push them away before they use the E to cleanse your curse. And you can use your robe to push away either the DPS or the healer. You just have to separate the two so that the healer can't cleanse your E off. The cultist sandals is also another piece of gear that helps you push kills through healers because it denies a lot of healing. When you turn it on, you leave behind a trail, and whoever stands on that trail gets both armor reduction and healing reduction. Now, the meta healers, life touch healers, have to stand still to cast their spells, right? So the cultist sandals is something that takes advantage of that. When they're standing still and casting spells, you can walk up to them and get that debuff on them to deny a lot of healing and to do a lot of extra damage because it also shreds armor. And then lastly, you have the Fiend Cow, which is a hard counter against regular bows. If you fight against a healer plus regular bow team, they're usually pretty deadly if you don't have purges for them. So if you see a bow, just swap to that and just spam purges at the bow and well, not spam it, but like purge their E buff every time they get it stacked, and you should pretty much never get pressure if you do that. And the Fin Cow also helps you chase down rats, especially the ones that rely on demon boots to stay alive, because you can just purge off their run buff and they won't be able to run away. Now, if you're new to Hellgate, you're probably thinking, holy shit, that's a lot of swaps that I have to bring. And yes, it is, and unfortunately that's just the way the Hellgate meta is right now. Because it is a lot easier to just out-swap and out-build the other team than it is to actually outplay the other team. So now let's talk about the healer's build. The healer build is the exact same build that we looked at last week with the bow video, but the super budget version is one hand holy, Tome of Spells offhand, Mage Robe, Cleric Cow, and a Scholar Cow swap, and a Knight Boot. And it's super important in this build to bring energy potions with you, especially if you're running the budget version and you're not bringing a Limher's Cape. You need the mana potions to give you mana to keep healing your teammate. When you do get a little upgrade, pick up a Limher's Cape and switch from One Hand Holy to Life Touch. The Life Touch is a super strong skill. It's actually like the most busted skill for 2v2 Hellgates right now because it cleanses all the debuffs on you, or all the non-damage over time debuffs on you. So for example, any stuns, any CC, silence, and it cleanses cultist cows, which is another huge debuff to cleanse. So when you play this build, just like with the curse, you want to start off on your safe set, so Cleric Cow and regular run at least, and if you want to, you can also run like Soldier Boots or even put on a Double Blade Staff, just so you can go check out the other team. And after you know what their build is, you completely disengage from them and you swap to whatever counters them. So against other teams that have a healer, you always want to run either Scholar Cow or Royal Cow, depending on how much money you want to spend. The Royal Cow is far superior to the Scholar Cow, but you can get away using the Scholar Cow, especially if there's still mobs around. So basically, every time you run low on mana, you turn on Scholar Cow and you walk into mobs, and it fills your mana bar right back up. But it does rely on taking damage to give you mana. So if you turn it on and the other team's DPS just don't hit you, you don't get mana unless you walk into mobs. And if you do walk into mobs, they can still try to deny you by either killing the mobs, pushing you away from the mobs, pushing the mobs away from you, or stealing the aggro from the mobs. So it's definitely not as good as the Royal Cow, which is basically you turn it on and you get infinite mana. But it is a lot cheaper, which is why we use it in the budget version of the build. The mercenary helmet, or sorry, the mercenary hood is another little upgrade that you can have against quarterstaff based teams, or sorry, quarterstaff and tomb hammer based teams. These are one-shot combos that basically just stuns you and then dumps a whole lot of damage on you. So if you cleanse out of the stun, they don't do damage to you. But it's not really a very good default safe set to go to. Like the Cleric Cow is still the best default safe set to go to, because it doesn't protect you against other types of one-shot comps that doesn't rely on a stun. For example, a Blackhand plus light crossbow. I'm gonna show you an example of this later, but if you try to Merc Hood a Blackhand and light crossbow comp, they will still just one-shot you. Now we're gonna look at some clips together and we're gonna talk a little bit about what's going on in these clips. A lot of these clips are gonna be us dying because I want to show you basically like what not to do when you play this build, so that way you don't make the same mistakes. Now when you play the cheap budget version of this build, you will get most of your victories from just playing against bad players or playing against players that are not really running the best builds. And that's really the whole point of this budget version build. If you get matched up against a tryhard team that's running a healer DPS comp, but they're just like way higher tier and running the more expensive equipments, you just shouldn't be able to win. You might be able to capitalize on one of their mistakes and punish them for it, but that's really just getting lucky, right? If they do everything like they're supposed to, they should just walk over you. But the good news is that most people in Hellgates aren't really running the super meta tryhard builds. They're there to either have fun or to just running the same kind of builds that we're talking about right now and see if they can make a little money from it. Like this team that we are playing against right now. When I kill this guy, you'll see that they actually have some decent level gear, but their team comp, one hand mace and light crossbow, I think is just not that good. Like it's probably some kind of a variant off of the Blackhand crossbow idea. but it's just not as good. Okay, so in this clip, I'm going to show you why you don't want to run Mercenary Hood as your default. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit earlier, but um, in this video, we'll actually show it. So we checked out the other team at this point, and we know they're running Blackhand and Light Crossbow, which is a one-shot comp that does not rely on one stun to do damage, right? Even if the Blackhand is not there, the crossbow will still do a shitload of damage. And knowing that, he still wanted to use the Mercenary Hood for some reason. So you're gonna see in a bit that he's gonna get deleted. The Blackhand has so much chain CC on it that if you cleanse one, he's gonna have a million more to follow up. Here it goes. So he cleanses the first stun and then is dead, right? So if you use Mercenary Hood against comp like this, against the Blackhand, you really can't cleanse all of their CC. If you cleanse one, he's gonna have like 3 more to follow, and the damage from the light crossbow doesn't rely on the CC to hit you, right? So it's not like the blazing staff where they can only do damage to you when you're not moving. The light crossbow will still blow you up regardless of whether you're CC'd or not, right? So if you were to use Clerical in that situation instead, right? All he had to do was just block the damage from the light crossbow for one burst, and then as soon as he comes out of the Clerical, he dash away to me with the boots. Then he would be safe. And then while the crossbow's damage is on cooldown, he'd be able to buy me some time and drop some damage on them and win the fight. But because he just died in an instant like that, like he died so fast, I didn't even manage to night boot him in time. Like there's no coming back from that one. Now, the Merc Hood is not good against Blackhands, but it is good against the stun and burst type of builds. Like in this one, we're fighting against a Tomb Hammer and a one-hand dagger. And their build, some people have played this with a quarterstaff instead of Tomb Hammer, but it's the same idea. Basically, they stun you, and the one-hand dagger will kill you before you get unstunned. Now, in this clip, you probably saw that at the very beginning our skills were on cooldown, and that's because we were able to check their build first and then run away from them and switch over to Mercenary Hood. Now at the beginning I actually did take a lot of damage because my skills were on cooldowns from the swap, so that's another mistake that I made that we could have avoided. And it's also why people run double-bladed staff with their safe sets. So if I had double-bladed staff on, or if I was just more cautious, I could just run completely away from them first and then swap. But I didn't do that. I was still kind of close to them when I swapped, so they actually caught up to us while our skills were still on cooldown. So I did take a lot of damage in the beginning, and that was like the only point though that we were at risk of dying. After that, once our skills come off cooldown, you see the Mercenary Hood is just like really effective against these stun and burst kind of builds. Because the Mercenary Hood has a fairly short cooldown, it's gonna help you not only against their bursts, but also while you're chasing them down. Because a lot of times they'll try to like stun you and run away, and the Mercenary will cleanse that stun. And also your healer has a W called Holy Blessing that makes you immune to knockbacks. That's also something that he should have on against these one-shot comps, because they makes you immune to knockbacks. So wind wall will also not affect you, so you can chase them down through those wind walls. Now, in this fight, we are playing against a nature and a carving sword. This is actually a healing nature player, not one of those Thorns nature players. So it is a healer DPS comp. And in this clip, I was doing a 0 to hero with Gachi, so you see that I have a 4.1 Curse staff on. You really shouldn't use a 4.1, you should just use a flat 5. They are almost the same price and they give you access to Grudge. But I don't have a tier 5 Curse staff, so I'm using the Curse Beam to substitute for the Grudge skill, which is not as good. Like Curse is really strong in fives when you have other teammates that are doing damage and you just like pierce their armor and amplify your whole team's damage. But when you're the only person doing damage, it doesn't quite give you enough damage compared to the grudge skill. Now, we do end up winning this fight because their sword runs out of mana. And also probably because we're fighting against a nature healer, not a life touch healer. If it's a life touch healer and I'm running this cheap build, we probably would have lost because I'd just never be able to do damage with my E because I can cleanse everything. But it is a nature healer, so we do manage to win this. But it was a really close fight, and we actually only managed to win because the sword runs out of mana. You can see his mana bar here is already starting to get pretty low. And then as he's chasing us, he's gonna like burn a lot of skills. He uses E and just drop to almost no mana. And that's when we turn around and actually win the fight. And another thing that went wrong for us here is we went in with regular run. And that's probably the reason why we had to run away for a little bit in the first place, because we didn't have the night boots on. If we both were running night boots, we would have blocked a lot of their damage on the sword, and they probably would have ran out of mana even faster. So that's another thing that just we forgot to do. But one thing I did right in this fight is as the curse player, right? When you're playing against a healer DPS comp, you don't want to just keep spamming your Q on one target. Your Q has a really short cooldown, and you can manage to keep 4 stacks of your Q on both of the players at the same time. So that's really important in these in fighting against these healer DPS comps, especially if you're to fight against a holy healer, because they can only heal one target at a time. So if you're dotting both of them, then that just makes it that much harder for them to heal. Even when you're fighting against a nature, like we're fighting against a great nature in this one, and he's using living armor and the protection of nature on his W and E, and those are both single target skills, right? So you can only put that on one person at a time. So if you just dot both of their team, then it makes it a lot harder for the healer to keep up with the healing. Alright, so in this next clip, it's going to be a mirror matchup. It's Holy plus Curse versus Holy plus Curse. And in a team comp like this, or in a matchup like this, it's really going to be like all about managing your healer's mana. And also, like, as the Curse player, again, like, try to spread your dots to apply your dots on both the healer and the curse. You'll see that I'm trying to do this a lot, and he's not really doing it enough. He's really just trying to like spam damage at me, and he kind of did a lot of damage to me, but it wasn't quite enough to like push through for a kill. Anyway, the important thing to watch for in this fight, though, is you'll see that both my healer and his healer just kept going into those mobs, turning on their Scholar Cal and walking into those mobs for mana. And then you'll see the other healer will sometimes come in to either try to knock them out of the mobs, or like knock the healer away from me to prevent healing. Yeah, and that's how you should play if you were in a matchup like this. Like, just try to deny healing by either knocking the healer away or knocking them away from the mob so they can't get mana. And we did come out on top in this fight, but just barely. You'll see me like almost dying here. And the only reason why we were able to survive is because my healer did a better job at managing his mana. He walked into the mobs and got a full mana bar, and the other team's healer, because they had pressure on us, they chased us for a bit, and they left the area where the mobs are. So here he like runs out of mana and he stops healing, and his DPS dies. So this next clip is an example of what happens if you don't manage your mana well. In this clip, we get matched up against a life touch DPS comp again, and the DPS this time is a dual swords. Now we checked out their builds and we know what they're running now, so we back off and we're switching our skills to fight a DPS life touch comp. So at the start of this fight, the DPS on the other side kills the two mobs that are down there because I want to get a safe engage on without the mobs. And because he's running dual swords, so he's stacking his Q right now on the mobs. Now I notice this and I tell my healer to back off, but he reacted slowly. So the sword comes in with 3 stacks and gets some big damage on us right away. But that's no big deal. We do have a lot of heal, so we recover from that and we start applying pressure. And at the beginning of this fight, we actually do really well because the healer on the other team is using his life touch E to heal and not using his life touch E to cleanse my bombs. So we actually start off putting in a lot of pressure on them. But eventually, my healer starts running low on mana, and by the time that he tells me he's running low, it's already too late for us to do anything about it. Because at the very start of the fight, the swords killed the 2 mobs guarding that entrance, right? So now we don't have the 2 mobs down there to use the Scholar Cow on for my healers. So when he turns on his Scholar Cow, the sword just stops attacking him and he couldn't get mana back. And when he runs kind of low on mana, he tells me, and we start trying to go north to the other mobs where he can use his Scholar Cow. But before we get there, we die because the sword was doing a lot of damage, and my healer just couldn't heal because he had no mana. So if you're playing the budget version of this build without Royal Cow, you need to play close to the mobs, right? So make sure you position yourself well for the fight and pick a spot close to the mob spawns to mobs that are alive so you can use a Scholar Cow on your healer. And in this next clip, I want to remind you guys that if you're going to use a Mercenary Hood, you have to remember to actually use that skill. My healer in this clip forgets to use his Mercenary Hood even though he just swapped to it, and he gets stunned and bursted in one burst. The second thing to show you in this clip is that the Bloodletters are pretty strong against this one-hand holy. Because if you drop below the threshold for the one-hand holy to do more healing, the Bloodletter can just execute you before you can actually get the heal off. Now, in this particular case, maybe he could have survived that first burst if he just remember to use the Mercenary Hood. But still, if you get stunned or if you were in the middle of a cast animation while you fall below the threshold for your holy, the Bloodletter can just execute you and you won't be able to actually use your E. And this is actually even worse when you face something like a Claymore that can just one-shot you from actually above your threshold. So this is just another reason why the one-hand holy is really just a budget build, and if you could afford it, you should run the life touch instead. Alright, so that's all I got for this video. As always, please remember to like and subscribe. And also remember, I stream every day now from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern United States time on Twitch. I'll have my Twitch link in the panels or in the video description, and I hope to see you guys there.